I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Bluemke.
And you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. We're here today with Myq Kaplan. You know him from his appearances on Last Comic Standing and every late-night talk show you could think of. He's known for his brilliant wordplay, as well as his self-deprecating humor. When you're a Jewish atheist vegan, it's probably hard not to joke about it. His albums Vegan Mind Meld and Meat Robot are absolutely hilarious, but his latest show, Small, Dork and Handsome, is, in my opinion, his best one yet. It's on Netflix right now, and you're going to want to watch it after we're done with this interview. So, Myq, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm fine if people want to watch the Netflix special while they're listening to the interview.
To be honest, I'm okay with that, too.
Yeah, should we, try to subtext it in and, do commentary without having it on?
We'll post both of them at the same time and then let people choose.
It'd be like a Dark Side of the Moon thing. It'd be great.
Yes. It would be awesome if this podcast synced up with his Netflix special.
Yeah, like The Wizard of Oz and that Pink Floyd album.
Exactly.
That's it. Okay, so here's this very serious question to start off with. The title, sure. Small, Dork, and Handsome. There is no comma after the word dork. So what do you have against the Oxford comma?
I don't have anything against it. There is one whenever I write it. So I think that somewhere along the line somebody didn't put it there, but I learned that the comma goes there, but I also learned that it is optional. So I don't have a problem with people not putting it, but when I write it, it's fair.
Well, somebody's really into AP style because AP style does not like Oxford commas. It's very serious.
We know the secret inner workings of Netflix now. So why Netflix for this particular special? Was that just a really neat opportunity? Did they seek you out to do this?
I made the special before knowing where it was going to go with a company called New Wave. They've produced a lot of specials that have ended up on Netflix, but also places like Comedy Central and Showtime and other things that I feel like Netflix is sort of eventually where everything is, unless it's, just being delivered via Louis C.K.'s website. And I would have been happy for that to be where it ended up, but there's a limited supply of things that go through that little filter. But we shot the special, and then my manager and the production company worked whatever magic that they do, like seeing who wanted it and what would be the best deal for it. And Netflix was the end result, which I'm very happy with. I like that it's there constantly. But it's nice to be somewhere else where maybe potentially there could be a bigger initial payday. But then, some specials on Comedy Central get shown once or twice and then never again. You don't really have control over it. And with Netflix, you don't have control over it either, but it's just there constantly.
But anyone can watch it whenever they want.
Right. Does it make a difference when you're writing your set if you don't know where it's going? Because I feel like if it's going to be on Comedy Central, maybe you want to tone down language, whereas Netflix, that's not as much of an issue. Does it make it harder to write material when you don't know where it's going to go?
No, I never think about the end result. I never think about the product, or I never think about it as a product, when I'm in the process of writing. Number one, there's plenty of things that they do say, late at night, after 11 or midnight on Comedy Central, that you'll be surprised that they're not even bleeping. But also, they'll either bleep everything, or if they want to, or they'll just put out, they'll have, obviously, if it's an hour special, once it's on with commercials, that cuts it down to 42 minutes. So if there's some stuff that doesn't end up in the final, for broadcast cut, so be it. But then the version that comes out either on DVD or as a download that, isn't as regulated, or it's on iTunes as well. So that version can have anything in it that people wanted to. So in general, I don't say tons of things that I think can't say on some television. I say words like bestiality, pedophilia, and necrophilia, but those are all, authorized. Children are allowed to hear those words.
Just not act them out.
Yeah, there's not tons of swearing in my stuff, though there are certainly words that are probably quote unquote worse or less desirable for some people. If people don't want to hear swears, they might not want to hear some of the content I'm putting out there anyway. But to answer your question, no, I don't. No, my writing is not affected by anything other than what I want to say and what I think is funny and what I bring to audiences, and just whatever comes through that process is what comes out.
So this is a question I've been wanting to ask you for years now. I think on Last Comic Standing, when you were competing on that show, the judges told you at that time that based on your material, you would make a great writer for someone else. You would make a great writer for another comedian.
It's a shitty thing to say.
It is a kind of shitty thing to say. And in the years since, you've totally ignored that advice and really made a name for yourself. And I guess my question is, did you feel the same way Jessica just did? Did you see that as kind of a, no, I'm not writing for someone else. I'm doing this for me. What was that? What was your reaction to that?
I think that I know what you're talking about, but I don't believe your memory of the thing that I was told is exactly
that may
in
be
line, either into the letter or even necessarily with the spirit of what they were saying.
Yeah.
One of the judges definitely told me that I was a really great comedy writer, which, might be damning with state praise because you don't want to be necessarily just a comedy writer if you're a comedian, because being a comedian is being part writer and part performer. Part performer. That's some comedy writing I just did there for you. But I don't think, they definitely didn't say or imply that I was a good writer for somebody else. I think they were saying that my material was just well written.
So you took it as a compliment, and it was a compliment.
And Hemmant thought that guy hated
it certainly wasn't all of the compliments. Like, it wasn't, hey, you're an amazing writer and an amazing performer. Oh, my God, why did he even say both those things separately? You're just amazing. Right. I would have been happy for the adjectives not being as, and the nouns not being as specific, but I was happy to have nice things said about me, period, on a reality show, even if it is one that was doing its best to showcase stand-up comedy in a positive light, which I think they've been doing a great job of the last couple seasons, including the one that I was on. So I do have no complaints, and I also do think that, like, when I started out in comedy, if writing and performing are the two components, if you want to break it down in that sort of dichotomy of stand-up, I certainly started out as a much stronger writer than performer, and looking back, I know, whatever people think of my performing now, it certainly has improved. If I look back at, sets on video or listen back to audio recordings of my earlier work from 10 years ago, there were definitely jokes that I'm still proud of, or that I'm like, those are definitely fine jokes that I know what I'm talking about. But if I actually witnessed the performance, I will cringe more at sort of the woodenness of my movement, or the haltingness, or the certain things that I would say or do just physically. I feel like a lot of people have a thing where they don't like to hear their voice or look at themselves on tape. I don't mind my voice, but I definitely, almost at every stage of the game, I'll look back at something from even a year or a couple years ago and be like, oh, I see ways that could be better, and I hope and think that I am better now. But it's, a constant process of being happy with where I am now, but also, not angry at, but glad that I'm not where I was a year ago, even though I was also happy with where I was then.
Yeah. You've improved over time, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think Hemmant and I have both, I don't know if you have, I couldn't speak for you, but I've listened back to, these podcasts. I'm like, Jess, you're an idiot. You should talk less.
I do that. I write, multiple blogs every day, and I say that about everything I've ever written. I wish I could have that do-over or something. But yeah, you get better over time.
So, Myq, I, just to let you know, I do a little comedy. I'm in the Chicago stand-up scene a little bit. So, my experience is that people tend to be a little, certainly skew left, but it's not been as, blatantly atheistic as I thought it would be. I remember talking to a guy he hosted my open mic, and I had done something about being an atheist, and I was like, well, you're an atheist, right? He's like, no, I'm Catholic. And I was like, well, that's weird of you. What do you find in, the comedy scene? Do you find people tend to, agree with your sort of worldview in terms of whether or not they believe in a God, or do you find that it's more varied than you'd think?
I think that for the people that talk about it are predominantly more on board, more aligned with my way of thinking, which, I probably used to say more that I was an atheist as opposed to, I don't really define myself as such. Like, if somebody, I'd like it rather to be, the beginning of a conversation as opposed to just a label that people will then be able to, tick off the box and be like, oh, well, then I know everything about you. I know how it works. I know what that means. And I have my preconceived notions or connotations that come along with it. And obviously labels can be useful in some respects, but now, when I think I was on the Pete Holmes' podcast, You Made It Weird, and he always asks comedians about their belief in God because he came from
he's very spiritual,
a more
still
religious upbringing.
Yeah.
And he sort of left, I think, the fold of the dogmatic church that he came up in. But he's he likes to believe. He likes belief as a concept. He wants to. He still has that mechanism within him, and I like that. I mean, also, I feel like I get that connection with the world, with love and art and music and humanity and connecting with people and feeling, and doing mushrooms and having legit experiences that saying. I'm actually reading a book of quotes by the Dalai Lama right now, and there's one that I can't paraphrase even close to what it says, but he says something about the idea of spirituality. A lot of people think of it as a woo-hoo kind of it doesn't really actually mean anything, but in his understanding, it was more tangible and more connected to, it's not supernatural. It's actually spirituality is natural. We all do have this mechanism within us that maybe evolved at some point to, to be that God place in your brain or that belief system. And, whether you are a hard atheist science person, that's not I believe in what I experience, what I see, what I sense. Mm-hmm. Also, what I read that other people who I trust or respect have said, I believe scientists have done experiments that I haven't replicated myself. This is getting a little far afield from the question, but I do think most of the comedians that Pete has on his podcast, which are a lot of my some of my idols, some of my peers, some people I don't know, but mostly people that I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. And it does seem like a lot of comedians that at least I'm familiar with and resonate with do skew more along atheist lines or don't care lines, just sort of live and let live. I don't know, doesn't, mostly I don't know, the sort of the line, if there is a line between atheism and agnosticism, it seems in the same way that there's certainly a spectrum of, say, sexuality from, obviously homosexual to heterosexual with bisexual or pansexual or other things that are not just those things in the middle, and you can be different components. But then sometimes there are people who, if a gay person is coming out of the closet but isn't fully ready to fully come out, there's certainly documented cases of people saying, I'm bisexual, and then eventually being, fully out of the closet and being I'm gay. I was just saying I was bisexual. Mm-hmm. But also there are certainly people who are fully bisexual all the time, and it shouldn't be questioned that is the case. But I think that people use agnostic sort of as the stepping stone, the toe in the water of atheists. I don't know, because it's both they both mean
you don't want the label either way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a happy medium.
Agnostic sounds a little softer. People think oh, okay, so you're not saying for sure that there's nothing. You just don't know. And I don't think that atheism means that, but whenever you have this hard label that is also associated with sort of the loudest and most vocal of the people of that group, whether it's atheism or feminism or whatever it is, those words sometimes turn people away from the reality behind even those words. Even if they would consider themselves those labels otherwise. I think even... there was a study I saw that said, with feminism, 80% of people's surveyed said that they were not feminists, but 80% of people surveyed said that they did believe in, the equality of the genders and thought that
they believe in the idea of feminism, if not the word.
Right, and sometimes it is the word or the associations people have with the word that are turned off. So I think that, I think most comedians are, people who reflect on themselves, their lives, the world around them. And so most comedians are not, necessarily scientists, but they're very frequently rational people, observational people. And these are, qualities that go along with not just, say, accepting a dogmatic overlord's view, but, doing more free thinking and questioning. And so, I would say that at least amongst my cohorts, there's certainly a lot of like-mindedness. And that like-mindedness is not to say that I'm like, and we're all just like preaching to each other's choirs all the time, but that this is sort of, rooted in openness to whatever there is or isn't. Like, I mean, sometimes if God appeared to all of us, I think we'd be like, okay, I guess so.
Yeah.
I think Daniel Dennett actually talked about what you were saying, which is there is a belief in belief. You believe that the idea of religion can be a powerful idea for good or for bad. I wonder if the fact that when you're an atheist, you are going up against religion, which is such a big and powerful force, I wonder if there's any truth to the idea that many comedians may skew in that direction because it is a lot funnier. You have a lot more material to work with when you're trying to take down something powerful, as opposed to, say, an evangelical Christian who's on stage who probably couldn't joke about religion in the same way. I don't know if you think there's any truth to that or not.
I mean, that certainly, on the face of it, resonates. There certainly are Christian comedians, and a lot of the times it just means that they are doing clean, wholesome shows to the whole family that you could do at church in front of a grandmother and a baby and your boss and whoever. But there's an evangelical, or certainly there's a Christian comedian named Brad Stein who I've listened to a long time ago. So I don't remember much of this, but I do remember there was one bit where he was certainly performing for people that were like-minded, like he was preaching to his choir as, just as, like if Bill Maher goes out, even if Bill Maher goes to Alabama, he's performing for the Bill Maher fans of Alabama. And most of Bill Maher's audiences are on board with Bill Maher. It seems unlikely that you'd pay a lot of money to go see Bill Maher deride everything that you believe in.
I actually have heard Brad Stein's comedy a little bit, and he goes after things like judicial activism and things like that, what you might expect.
That was the exact example I was going to bring up, so maybe that's the only thing he talks about.
Yeah.
But, I remember, it was something from years ago when it was, I feel like we haven't heard much about activist judges in a while, but there was, I guess, a time when that was a much more hot-button issue that he was tackling. And that's the thing. I mean, that sort of gets into, obviously, other, there's the Bible, and then there's the Constitution. And theoretically, we recognize that the Constitution is a living document. We are allowed to make changes, like the commandments aren't in stone. The amendments can be changed. That's literally what amend means.
Right.
But we're always still like, but what do these old white-only men, who had slaves think about this thing when they also thought that women shouldn't vote and were property? Like, what do we think they thought? I'm like, well, don't we think? I mean, they didn't have, I don't know when the light bulb came around, they didn't have as much electricity or the internet or connectedness to everything else, like other ways of thinking from all over the world that we have at the tips of our fingers.
Or semi-automatic weapons.
So, I feel like that's the kind of thing that, today, obviously, maybe Brad Stein's having a field day with, all of the courts that are now saying, hey, gay marriage, actually, probably the right thing. In 20 years and 30 years and 50 years, we'll all be like, oh, yeah, that was kind of silly. That wasn't allowed.
I think the last time I heard of him, he was appearing in the movie, I could get this wrong, but I think it was called A C for Christmas, or one of those Christmas movies where the big atheists are coming to take away the nativity scenes. And he's one of he's a character in the movie where they're trying to take back the town for Christ or something like that. That was the last time I heard of him anyway.
I gotcha. So the point is, there are comedians who you can make any topic funny, kind of from any angle, depending on your audience and your goal. Like when I would listen to him, I would be like, oh, this is kind of like, I knew a guy who did a character, like a liberal guy who did sort of a right-wing, conservative, kind of Christian character of a comedian. And I'm like, oh, I can listen to Brad Stein and just imagine that he's like this. But, I also know that he means it. But
right.
Like the same way that when I worked at a corporate bookstore and we had rallies in the morning, I had to pretend that the guy was like doing satire like Dilbert to not feel the worst about myself. But I definitely, I think, there's certainly, comedy can be about anything, but I'm a fan of the, punching up as opposed to down. Like it's certainly, I'm not going to name topics or things that there's nothing that's off limits. Like people can make, anything can be made funny. Like if somebody's like, hey, you can't joke about AIDS or cancer or the Holocaust or pedophiles or there's people that do it brilliantly, and depending on even like I've listened to Patrice O'Neill is a guy who I think was brilliant, and I don't agree with everything that he said. And there's comedians today that are alive that in the same spirit, have like really interesting brains saying really interesting things that I'm like, oh, I wouldn't like feed this thought process into like a developing child's brain, but as it exists, it paints a useful portrait of something that exists in the world. Like he came from a place, he came from a subset of society where this was his truth, and obviously different viewpoints are valuable. But yeah, I think it is, to answer your question, to make a long story a different story, but eventually the story that you asked about, and a little shorter. Yeah, it seems like, for me certainly, I can't really speak for anybody else because I am only myself as far as I know, except when I'm mushrooms, when I am also all others, which I guess I am at all times as well, because time is meaningless. So it's certainly
given you a lot of material.
What's that?
Religion's certainly given you a lot of material to work with, though.
It definitely did in the past, and I guess even my most recent special, like, if people are just watching it, like if you've seen it since it came out, which is probably
they're watching it as they're listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
So
they're
right.
They're up to the part about Judaism now. They're up to the part about Judaism now, so we can touch on that.
Say that again?
Never mind.
It's all good.
It's fine. So actually, you finish your thought.
My apologies. It is not my desire to not hear everything that you're saying, but sometimes it happens, and I just want to take responsibility, even though it might be Verizon's fault.
No big deal. We'll call Verizon, give them a talking to. But,
actually, I was on the phone with Verizon yesterday, and they helped me resolve an issue with my that I thought was a problem with my texting mechanism. And then while I was on hold, they were trying to fix it, and the guy had a lot of useful things to tell me about show business. Yeah,
I'm sure that advice is always appreciated.
Legitimately, it was not just the sort of like, oh, you should try to get on the Tonight Show. It was actually a lot more specific, and and directed at the right person and the right time in their career. I'm sure it would have been very helpful, and was a pleasure to interact with a guy while I was waiting for my phone to work. But
actually, the best advice I've gotten about comedy was a woman asked, have you ever done an open mic at the Laugh Factory? And I said, oh, no, not yet. And she said, oh, my friend did an open mic at the Laugh Factory, and now he's a writer on Colbert, so you should do that. And I was like,
It's just that easy.
Easy peasy. What am I doing here talking to you?
The steps, one stepping stone to the next. But, oh, yeah, you were saying, certainly their religion, has a huge impact on the world, and so as part of the world, it is something that I have, observed and taken in and developed thoughts on, and a lot of those thoughts have turned into jokes. And I guess they still are, like, I was going to say, like, I'm a little less, I feel like some of the jokes that I made in the past might have been harsher, and I think I've always tried to direct, make if the joke has a target, that the target isn't, individual people who believe specific things that don't hurt anybody, but, the kind more like extremists whose,
Right.
viewpoints and actions are aimed to do specific damage to groups of people's rights or health or whatever the case may be. And similarly, I know that I'm not perfect. I'm not omnipotent. I don't know everything that exists, and I wouldn't claim that I do. I barely claim to know the things that I think I know.
Well, your latest special, you definitely touch on things like the arguments some religious people use against gay marriage
Right.
equality, things like that. So that makes sense. I'm wondering, what have you learned from the comedians you feel are at the top of their game right now? What have you learned from them, whether you're working with them or watching them?
I guess here's a specific thing. I don't know if this is the kind of thing you're looking for, but I had the good fortune to, over the past several years, open for Louis C.K. a few times. And this is actually the first time I'm making this analogy that Eminem is a guy who's, I think, he's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, rappers. And, leaving aside whether, he is now sort of and has always been, homophobic or sexist or whatever the case, certainly those are valid criticisms if you don't want to listen to him. But his rapping is just so technically amazing. And one of the things that he does in rap is, he'll tell a story, and it seems to me that it happens to rhyme. Obviously, his brain is, has done so much work to create that effortless seemingness, which is the same thing that some of the greatest comedians do. It looks like they're just talking, whereas with rap, he's just it seems like he's like a magnet, just shooting into the future and then drawing rhymes to him and to his story and to the narrative, and words that you're of course I know all these words. It's such a simple sentence, but never constructed like this before. How did this happen? And I feel like Louis does the same thing with sort of social conscience in a lot of ways, or social reasonableness even. They'll just say a thing that is funny because it's true, but because society has become so twisted and far from reasonable on whatever issue it is, just saying the simple truth, which obviously over the course of time has been, constructed and developed and honed, but it seems like he's just saying a real thing, and then there it is as humor, the same way that I think The Onion once I saw when, normally The Onion headlines are made up, not true stories, but every once in a while, when Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California, I think their headline was just, Arnold Schwarzenegger now leads world's fifth largest economy.
Right.
And that was just the truth, and the sheer ridiculousness of it made it comedy. Paula Tompkins, another favorite of mine, put out through, I think, an extra episode of his podcast, the Product Topcast, one of my favorites, called Chick Tract, or Chick Tract. It's about,
which we're all well aware with.
20 minutes. You familiar with it?
Yeah, if you're an atheist, those are the old tracts that kind of have the stereotypical view of everybody, and Jesus wins in the end.
Yeah.
I love, this, Paul Tompkins, an amazing comedian, an amazing performer, and if people haven't heard his piece about Chick-fil-A, it's just, it's the same thing, it's just him saying true things with his, what I think is the ideal, sort of, I don't want to say right attitude, but just the kind attitude, I think one of my favorite parts of it was just him, the person, the foil, his friend who's saying well, Chick-fil-A, I don't really vet everyone else, all the other businesses. He's but now I'm not telling you to do that. Just now that you know this, don't give your money to this if you know it. He's I don't like to get political. Oh, I don't think of this. This is the thing. He's I don't think this is political. I think political is should states have more rights? It should be bigger government, smaller government. Not those people are an abomination. That seems a little more than political to me, I think. That's my best
That's a good Paul F.
approximation
Tompkins impression.
So, yeah, I guess that's the sort of thing. I mean, we're all influenced, and we all take by everything that we experience, by all the world that we live in, by the art that we enjoy, by the entertainment that we see, some that we try to avoid. But, I mean, I think obviously the best comedians are just the best at being themselves, like finding what makes them the funniest, what they care about the most, what engages them and what gets audiences to be engaged by them. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's interesting because I'm both inspired to, you know, obviously you're both the sculptor and the sculpture as a comedian. And, you know, this whole thing about, maybe, I don't know how old it is, but when somebody asks a sculptor, like, how do you sculpt that? How you sculpt an elephant? How do you do that? He's like, well, you just take a block of marble and you chip away and everything that doesn't look like an elephant. And
that's the elements of a good joke.
What's that?
That's the elements of a good joke. You kind of take away the stuff that doesn't work until it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yes, but even more so on a macro level, like that's what you're chipping away the parts of, you know, yourself that you don't want to be yourself, or the parts of, you know, you're this more amorphous whole when you start before you, as some people say, developed your voice or found your persona or whatever, figured out who you are on stage. You're like chipping away parts of you that won't be you, that aren't you, or parts of the world that you're like, oh, I don't want this part. I don't want to say this kind of thing. So just figuring out who you are, and even obviously you are an evolving thing. So it's like you're a living sculpture, and you're like, I'm not an elephant, but I mean, maybe I am. Maybe I'll eventually be an elephant. That's how my comedy's heading, I think.
Myq, one last question for you. You told the New York Times a couple of years ago that no joke is ever finished. And I wonder if there is any joke of yours, or how often does that happen, where you rewatch one of your old albums or specials and you're like, oh, I wish I could have a do-over on that one because I could have gotten an extra laugh or three.
Well, I guess, I mean, I stand by what I said. There's certainly jokes that, you know, you think that you've gotten everything out of. And if I don't, I don't go back and listen to my first album very frequently, but I guess if I did listen to it all the time, I would continually find new things in it. The same way, what does happen more is like the Netflix special, I recorded it in April of 2013, I believe. And then from that point on, I started, I didn't immediately discard all those jokes as I would perform on the road. I would still be performing. I had some new jokes that weren't in the special, weren't ready to be recorded yet. So those would eventually become the bulk of now, what I'm doing now, which is all new since the special. But for a time, I was doing, like my closer would probably be something that was in the special still. And so, like anything, like the same way that, like language changes and keeps growing and developing, and people get mad at it even though that's how it works, and people revere Latin, but only because it's dead. Like, language always changes as long as people are speaking it. And we're like, oh, Latin, that's where it's at. It stopped. Like, yeah, because nobody...
It's not going to evolve.
Only used for science and religion, weirdly. But so there was a time when, eventually all my, jokes sort of get frozen as I stop using them. But for a time, there's definitely like one of the jokes from the special that I came up with, a great line, a couple weeks or a couple months after the special had already been recorded. I'm like, well, I guess that this line is only for the few months worth of audiences
that haven't seen the special.
And it was before the special hadn't even come out yet. So somebody could ostensibly have seen me do that joke live, loved it, then see the special and be like, hey, where's that line? I mean, I don't know if anybody's listening to my work with so keen an ear, but anyone, feel free to, here's a little guessing game for you. There's the line that is centaur penis that belongs somewhere in the special, and if you want to figure out where it goes, that could be a little game for people.
That will be a game. We'll just start inserting it everywhere and see if it makes it even funnier.
Maybe we can drop it into our podcast in the next few episodes.
Yes.
Okay, well, Myq, we don't want to take up too much of your time, so thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for wanting me to join you, and then allowing me to join you, and for joining me. Everyone's joined.
And people can find your latest special, Dork
and Handsome. It's on Netflix.
Fuck.
Damn it, Jessica.
I dropped the ball. I'm sorry. Nobody's going to find your special now.
Don't worry. We'll provide links on the website when
Nobody
this goes
reads
up.
The links.
Thanks, Myq.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And I have lots of things online. If you put my name in places, I'm sure you'll find them all, like my podcast, other albums, and whatever else I've done that I don't remember. So thank you.
Bye,
Thanks, Myq.
You've been listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois. The music was composed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant. That's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blimke. We hope you'll join us next time.